Hey, what's up guys? How's it going? It's Dakanoth Fisherman here, and today we're going to cover the best gear for free-to-play as well as the medium pay-to-play. The, oh, I got a couple $100 kind of guy, and then the guy that doesn't have a limit. So, where to begin? When it comes to pay-to-play, right, the one thing I'm going to put a minor little, little stipulation is anybody to everybody on the major pay-to-play end has champion gear. At Mythic, no question. Alright, now, generally, it's gonna boil down into what unit type they're working on. So, there's, full cap sets, full range sets, full, basically, you boil it down that way. So, a lot of free-to-play, whether they know this or not, okay? Here's the thing, most free-to-play, when they're starting out, are actually an inf range setup. Because the best set you can get is going to be the Indulgent Visage for the helmet, which increases infantry range, right? Which means that even at Legendary, that's 10%, but at Mythic, it's 14%. Again, if you're somebody that was like, oh, hey, I got to Mythic this piece, don't. If you're going to go past that point, you're, free-to-play. But, so getting into the nitty-gritty of this, right? Now, I've always been a big fan of Winter Parka for the armor, and I say that because it's 15% HP and then 12% into infantry, which already complements the current set that most free-to-play are working with. But most free-to-play are probably not going to jump into that right away, so sometimes they'll grab the Army of the Abyss. But between the Army of the Abyss and Winter Parka, I personally think the Winter Parka is better. It just takes a lot longer to do, which is always the big concern whenever you're free-to-play, right? Because the more time and effort you have to spend in doing something, it means it's going to take a lot longer. Now, for the leggings, okay, free-to-play wise, a lot of the time what people end up doing is they probably resort to getting the honeycomb chaps. And this is going to fix the cav aspect of it, because a lot of the time that free-to-play don't really get enough cav attack in their bonuses, So, there's really nothing wrong with getting the range attack out of it, plus the range defense, but I don't know, if you're somebody that is, starting out and you're really wanting to get, a good chunk of bonuses, the Honeycomb Chaps gives you a mix set, which is good and all, right, because it gives you the ability to swap between different types. But I think for the most part, depending on what you're wanting to do, if you're, somebody you're wanting to be purely in range, then just get the Corrupted Boots, or even better, if you're, wanting to complement your account, again, going back to the fact that, when it comes to leggings, right, I almost think most people really ought to be taking the legs of the Deceiver, because really you're getting an enormous chunk of army attack there, which is, in my opinion, way, way, way better than the Honeycomb Chaps by a long shot, right? But again, it's a little difficult, right, because it's not going to be easy to actually accomplish that. But if you're free to play, I personally feel like that's probably a really good place to go. I would grab the legs of the Deceiver, in my opinion. But then again, obviously, hey, maybe you're somebody that wants to focus on a range set, more focused towards that. Okay, then the Nether Walkers are probably not a bad choice, because you're going to grab another 15% into range attack. Provided, of course, we're looking into this purely from an aspect of, well, are you trying to be mixed? Are you trying to be purely cav? Are you trying to be purely range? Whatever it might be. But most of the time, free-to-play are going to start off with an inf-range set, whether they want to or not. And so for that reasoning, the legs of the Deceiver will give you kind of that option to kind of do whatever you please, which I think is probably a better choice out of all of the pieces that you could have. Now, for the actual main hand, for free-to-play in particular, a lot of the time what people do is they start off getting the Fiery Tomahawk, which is a really good piece to grab when you're starting out, because that's going to even you out. And again, if we're talking on the extreme end, then where do you go from there? I would say, at least for mild free-to-play, if you're able to, I would either complement that with a Wormrod. Wormrod's not terribly difficult. It's still kind of like the legs of the Deceiver. It's going to take a little while, right? Because you got to get 2 rares every time, right? Which means it will take you approximately a year, maybe longer, depending on how long. I mean, you're going to have to be in a monster hunting guild. You're going to have to hunt a lot and pray that you'll eventually get the drops to get what you need. But, it's just like anything. It's an incredibly hard endeavor to go about doing that. So most of the time, people end up getting the Fiery Tomahawk. I've seen some people, what they'll do is they'll actually get the Dragon's Bite. Nothing wrong with this, because really what you're doing is you're increasing your HP, and then you're complementing the infantry attack, which, in my opinion, is really not such a bad thing, right? But, you know, if you're going to have, you know, the question of, well, do I want mixed? Do I want this? There's not really a wrong answer here. You know, it's just all depends on playstyle. You know, are you trying to be more ranged? Then the Worm Rod's really not a bad choice. Are you trying to be a little bit more infantry? Then get Dragon's Bite. If you're looking for an overall, like, you know, what's good? If I'm being imp ranged, then I would get the Dragon's Bite. But having that said, most people start off with the Fiery Tomahawk. Now, when we're talking about the offhand, I've seen a lot of people, what they'll do is they'll grab the Dark Ages, which, again, complements a mixed set and adds a little bit of infantry attack. Not a bad choice, right? But that's, again, one rare. Takes a little while, even for modern free-to-play. You know, so a lot of the time what people will end up doing when they're starting out is they get the Lunar Scimitar. And what that gives you is a little bit of range attack and then complements the HP again. And again, we're focusing on that aspect of it because that's kind of what most people end up doing. But as you build up, right, and you've actually gotten to a point where maybe you can actually build something decent, right, the question of, okay, well, if I'm an infrarange player, what piece do I need to have? You know, I could see where, you know, a Viral Switchblade is, like, really decent in that regard because you're getting 15 and 15, but it's 2 rares, right? Not going to be super easy right off the bat. You know, so then you're looking at, well, what about the Winter Mitts? Don't even touch it because you're not going to be able to. It's free to play. It's going to take so long. You could try, right? But I don't feel like most free to play will even get a chance at it because it takes so many rares. But chances are, you know, if you're free to play and you're just kind of working your way up the ladder, basically, you know, if you're trying to go for more of a mix set, you might want to probably complement it with the Call of the Deep. But just like the Viral Switchblade, it's 2 rares, right? And depending on which way you go, in my opinion, you're benefiting yourself if you get the Viral Switchblade because you're just giving yourself infant range, which is really not a bad choice. But you could also get the Dark Ages, get 10% across plus 10% into infantry, and that's what most people end up doing, in part because of the 1 rare requirement versus a 2 rare requirement. Again, just kind of depends on what you're going for. Now, for the accessories, this is where a lot of people kind of jump all over the place, right? But most of the time, right, when you're starting out, you're going to probably eventually want to work your way up to Lost Island Relics, which, if I can find them, aha! Alright, so the Lost Island Relics are like the part of the reason why I say a lot of people start off as an infrarange main, because Lost Island Relics are infant range. Okay, and there's no way to escape that fate. So if you want to bounce off of the Lost Island Relics, and after a certain point, maybe you've got enough rares, you can then start to complement it with, like, hey, maybe I need to get some secret totems. That's going to give you some HP and defense and infantry attack, which will help. Or you could then go up a step further and get Terror Vials. And Terror Vials are really, really good. Like, anybody to everybody gets Terror Vials for that reason, because Terror Vials are the best imp set in the game. If you're more mixed, you get Burning Scrolls. And this is where you start getting into the, you know, sets that traps use and stuff, because in part because of the HP and the attack bonuses. Now, I've seen just as many people that what they'll do is they'll even grab, like, the Worm Seal. And there's nothing wrong with that, and even like a Blight Ring, really. But the thing about it is the Blight Ring is like 7 rares, which is just not touchable for most free-to-play. A Worm Seal is 3 rares, which is still very difficult. Okay, and the Burning Scroll is 3 rares, right? I mean, I'm reminding you this because it's not going to be like a walk in the park, you know, compared to like a Terror Vial, where it's actually a little bit more plausible. Okay, but even like the secret totem that I was telling you about is a lot more plausible. Okay, but those are things that you have to consider. Now, I think a lot of the time, you know, for mixed sets in particular, what a lot of people will do is they'll go for the Aqua Antimonies because you're going to get your Cav and Inf bonuses at 8% apiece. And there's nothing wrong with that when you're starting out as a free-to-play. Now, I mentioned all of those alternatives to you because that is what most people do. It all depends on whether or not you want to be infantry and range focused, Cav, Inf, and range, and vice versa. But those are the options that I've seen people use. You can make those decisions on your own, but what you have to know is Are you focusing on infant range? If you are, which is what most free-to-play really, in my opinion, ought to be doing, that works a hell of a lot more in your benefit, because then you're basically doing the best you can in infantry and range. And at some point, you can then decide, well, maybe I want to go cavalry. Well, then you start making fear drums, and then all that does for you really is it bumps up your cav ability. If you had even like a set of 3 drums at like even blue, for example, that's not bad. Like 7% times 3 is really not that bad. But I've seen just as many people that will go for, they'll go for the aqua anemones, and even that is not bad. Like it's really not difficult to get aqua anemones, and the fact that you don't really need any rares for these, right? So again, it's just something that you have to kind of think about, and it depends on what you want to do. But for the most part, if you're starting free to play, that is ultimately what you do. For the medium pay to play, all right, this is where you start to get kind of into the realm of like those 3, 4, 5 rare items, because at this point you can kind of afford to manage to at least potentially get 1 or 2 of them. Now, I've seen some people that kind of, depending on what they want to do, right? I've seen some people, what they'll do is they'll eventually jump off from an Indulgent Visage. They'll win themselves off that infantry and range set. And so then they start to look at it like, okay, so should I get one of these really big pieces like the Beast Helm, the Bumble Helm, or the Wormbone Cornet? And here's the thing, right? So if you get like a Beast Helm, that's infantry and cavalry, but it's also 10 rares. That takes forever. 10 rares is an enormously difficult thing to do. Like, most people are going to be in the large pay-to-play to get these things to legendary. It takes forever. Now, like a Wormbone Coronet is only 6, so it's a little bit more reasonable. But it's still way up there on the, can you actually get it? For most medium pay-to-play, I would say your only options really is to pretty much build off to an Ancient Hat. In part because you can get a lot of range attack that way. Now, I think for 4 rares, that's okay. Not terrible, but okay. Like, you can eventually build up to a range hat if that's what you want to do. If not, then what you probably ought to start doing is probably start working your way up to either a Wormbone Cornet or a Beast Helm. And that all depends on what are you focusing on, right? If you're going for infantry, the Beast Helm is pretty much the only piece in here that you really want to pay attention to. Because at that point, that's the only piece that matters. If you're going for cavalry, then you're going to want to go for the Bumble Helm, because that's really the only piece that complements it. It all depends on what you're going for. Now, for the torso, at least for medium pay-to-play, you could jump to a Terror Shield, right? And the Terror Shield's a 9 rare item. But it's still, like, I wouldn't touch it if it were me. Like, a Firewall Plate is kind of the same thing, It's like, if you want to, great, but it all depends. Are you going for infantry? Well, if you're going for infantry, go get a Terror Shield. If you want infantry and cavalry, get a Firewall Plate. Because of the HP bonus that you get, plus the Cav and the Inf. Because again, I stress this a lot, because ultimately what that gives you is the ability to kind of choose between 2 types, 1 type, vice versa. Because 1 type sets will work great because they're increasing just infantry, or just range, or just cavalry. And so medium pay to play, you have to kind of decide, are you going to be purely cavalry? Are you going to be purely range? Or do you want to be a combination of the 2? And if you want to be a combination, then you start looking for these pieces that give you not 1, but 2 stats for the same price. That's basically what you're aiming for a lot of the time in 2 type sets. Now, having that said, for medium pay to play, again, you have a couple of choices here, right? So you could get the Hedonic Kirisk, which is your infant range set, which is basically a beefier version of that Indulgent Visage that you'd seen earlier. There's a Hardened Carapace, which is more for the Cav and range players, right? And again, when it comes to actually picking out, like if you're going for mixed sets and stuff like that, in my opinion, if you're medium pay to play and you want a piece that's probably going to complement it pretty darn well, and give you enough room to kind of choose and make decisions, I feel like the Winter Park is a really nice piece because it's only 1. And it's not terribly difficult for a medium pay to play to grab. Plus, you get the 15% into HP and 12% into infantry attack. It's not like 8. That's not terrible, right? But it's not great either. It gives you the HP that you need. But if you're going to go into that larger pay to play, it almost doesn't have a limit to it, then you start to think about a Firewall Plate, a Terror Shield, or a Hardened Carapace, or a Hedonic Kirisk, depending on what you're aiming for. You know, but when we're talking leggings, all right, now this is where we kind of get into, you know, okay, for the mild pay to play, Gargantuan Belt is pretty hard to achieve, seeing as how it is 8. Dragon's Talon is 8. And again, you see how I've been, you know, how I was telling you, if you're going for a 1-type set in Cavalry, Gargantuan Belt, no question. If you're going for a 2-type set, a Dragon's Talon. If you're going for a 2-type set in Infantry and Cavalry, Storm Tassets. You know, that's where these 2-type sets, but you can see like this, it's 11 rares. It is almost untouchable when it comes to actually getting them. And so the Legs of the Deceiver, I think for most people, once they get those for a mix set, I don't think most people should really bother messing with it after that. Like, unless you're just super interested in getting into range, then you start getting your Nether Walkers, and that's really about it. For the equipment, the Great Sword is great. This is probably one of the best pieces I think a medium pay to play can grab, because it's basically a fiery tomahawk on steroids. Having that said, though, if you're wanting something a little bit above that, the major pay-to-play will grab the Skull Crusher, because that's a mixed but better alternative, right? Now, on the scale of like, oh, do I want to go a 1-type set in Infantry? Then the Terror Lash is better. If you're going for a 1-type set in Cavalry, then go for the Horn Cudgel. If you're going for a 2-type set in Nectar Orb, a 2-type set Deca Sword, 2-type set, you know, you get the point. Okay, but that's kind of how you build up from there. And again, you know, if you're looking for a 1-type, a Malicious Saw is great for Infantry. And again, I point this out because this is how you build your set. Okay, once you're at medium pay to play and you're going past that, this is the logic you have to kind of think about. It's not whether or not this piece is good for this or it's good for that. If you work the way I do, you just get 1-type sets so that way you can just overrun them. You know, I'll send 2.3 million, and maybe I'll catch them off guard. And I'll send a Cavalry Phalanx and their Infantry, and they've got range in there, so they swapped a range Phalanx. And maybe I'll swap my gear and just try to fool them into thinking that maybe I was sending another type in the front line. And it's, you know, the idea is always to be in counter. Okay, and that's really all the gear does for you. And a lot of people have asked me, you know, why the heck did you put defense tools in this gear? And that's because essentially all that defense does is it negates attack on that unit type. So, and yeah, for 2-type sets, obviously that makes great sense. And rally traps, not so much, because rally traps are just trying to do as much damage as possible. So having 3 attack jewels on all 3 would be great. But, you know, again, this is just the mindset, right, of what you're trying to achieve in that set and what you're going for. I hope this kind of clears up kind of the whole, you know, some questions you guys have had. Needless to say, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys next time.